What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about the forwards at the 7.5 million price bracket, plus Kai Havertz as well. We can't leave him out. A price bracket where there's a bit of ownership for these players, but they're not really being talked about that much. So I want to go through and discuss who the best options might be. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button. Let's get straight into it. All right, let's start with Kai Havertz. Now, I know he's not 7.5 million, but if I don't include him in this video, he's probably going to get missed out because there's unlikely to be a premium forwards separate video, because after Havertz, it's only Isak, Watkins and Haaland, and those three are so popular, they're going to get covered anyway. So I'm going to talk about Havertz here. He's off the back of a pretty good season for Arsenal. It was 13 goals, 10 assists, so 23 attack and returns total. And his minutes were pretty good. He did move around in terms of the position he played, but he was often in that first 11 for Arsenal. And given how he played and the transfers they've made so far, you would expect that to continue. And I think from an attacking point of view, I've said this a few times already, that Arsenal's fixtures are actually quite good. I think defensively it's tough because you've got Villa, Spurs and Man City away first 5 game weeks. But Villa and Spurs in particular, they could be gotten at by that Arsenal attack. So I think he's worth looking at. The reason that I've not had him in too many drafts so far is because he feels like a player I would have as well as Isak, not instead of, if that makes sense. Like, I think for that 0.5 million more to get to Isak, it just makes a lot of sense to find it from somewhere to get a better forward with better underlying stats, with as good, if not slightly better fixtures to open up with, but also has penalties as well. And I know Isak's probably got competition in Callum Wilson if he can get fit and he stays, and it might mean early substitution from Isak. But at this point, right, Isak is first choice number 9 for Newcastle. If he's fit and available, he's always going to be in that first 11. So I think if it's a choice between Havertz and Isak, there's not really any competition. I think there's almost always a downgrade in people's teams for 0.5 to make sure you can buy Isak instead. But if you're looking at Havertz in addition, I think he stands up pretty well to the 7.5 million options. And another thing that I've seen other people point out is his non-penalty expected goals last year were 0.39 per 90 minutes, and his expected assists were 0.13. Now, if I just bring up Fantasy Football Hub here just for 2 seconds, let's just go here. There we go. And go to the tool section and look at his stats. If you look at when he played number 9, the numbers were actually a little bit better. Now, there were various points in the season where he did that, but the majority of it came after game week 26. So if I just find Havertz here and then change the game week range to game week 26 to 38, I should have prepared this already. His expected goals per 90 goes up to 0.51. So his goal threat was even higher. Now, it's worth pointing out that's a small sample size, right? A whole season versus just the last 13 or 14 game weeks. But it is encouraging. So if he's going to start the season as Arsenal's number 9, there is definitely potential for points there. I've seen the above average FPL podcast, I think it was, the numbers going around from that given the bonus changes, he would have got plus 12 after his change from a midfielder last year to a forward. Although it's worth pointing out, he'd lose about 29 points from clean sheets and not getting an extra point for a goal. But I still think if he continues as the number 9, those points will come. So he's a good option. I guess the thing to talk about as well is potential competition for him. Now, the transfer window is still open, right? So Arsenal might buy someone else. And they have got other players that can play number 9. But Nketiah always feels like he's going to be a bit part player at Arsenal. I wouldn't be surprised if they get rid of him. Martinelli can play number 9, but we've barely seen that under Arteta, so I don't think that's a problem. The one player to be slightly concerned about if he's fit is probably Gabriel Jesus. Now, towards the end of the season when Havertz was playing number 9 and Jesus was fit, he mostly played on the wing rather than through the middle. Earlier on in the season, he played centre forward and Havertz was more of an attacking 8. But towards the end, it wasn't... Basically, it was Jesus on the wing, is what I'm trying to say, badly as always. So I think, given how Havertz has played, Arteta will stick with that. But there has to be at least some concerns that it won't always be the case. I think if you said right now that Havertz is going to play the first 6 game weeks as number 9 and get 80+ minutes in every game, he's a really good option for 8 million. There is maybe slight uncertainty about whether Jesus might come in the odd time and take minutes off him, and he might play a slightly deeper role. So I like him, but I just think with 3 forward slots and a lot of people going for Isak instead, it's probably hard to fit Havertz in, but he's definitely worth considering if you want an Arsenal attacker. So Dominic Solanke is not a player I've given much consideration to so far while playing around with different drafts during pre-season. But while I was putting the graphics together, I'm starting to wonder whether that's a little bit harsh, because he's the only player in this price range where he's nailed on. He's going to start every single game when he's fit. He always plays pretty much close to 90 minutes. He's on penalties. The underlying stats are good. And as of right now, there's not massive transfer speculation in terms of him leaving Bournemouth. I wouldn't completely rule it out, by the way, because he's only 26. He's a good player. Lots of teams looking for a number 9. But he's contracted until 2027. So if someone is going to buy him, he's going to cost a lot of money, right? And there's other players we'll talk about in a second where we can be a bit more confident they are probably going to leave. So I think he does look like an all-round decent option. His non-penalty expected goals last year were 0.46 per 90, 0.06 expected assists. And the returns were very similar, if not the same in terms of goals with Ollie Watkins. I can't quite remember what Watkins finished on. Yeah, 19 goals, which is exactly the same as Solanke. The reason that Watkins did so well in terms of points was the assists. I've spoken about that before. Whether or not he's going to hit that many assists this year, I'm sceptical. But in terms of goals, you got exactly the same with Solanke for 1.5 million less. And part of that is because he obviously takes penalties. So he is a really solid option. In terms of the fixtures that Bournemouth have, I definitely wouldn't say they're amazing or anything like that. It's Forest away, Newcastle at home, Everton away, first 3. And then straight after the international break, it's Chelsea at home and Liverpool away, which is not great. Then you've got Southampton at home in game week 6, which is a bit nicer. And it's Leicester away in game week 7. But even after that, when you look a bit longer term, it's then Arsenal at home, Villa away, Man City at home. So Bournemouth don't have a sustained great period of fixtures over the first kind of 9-10 game weeks. But what you do get with Solanke is consistency in terms of minutes, goal threat, and stuff like that. There's nothing to say that he can't do well, especially in those first 3 fixtures, and then Southampton at home in game week 6. So I think he's pretty good. The one thing I have thought about is combinations for drafts, right? So this isn't my current draft right now, but just to give you an example, right? Let's say I set up with an 8.5 million midfielder like Odegaard or Fernandes, and up front I had a 4.5 million forward like Stewart. Nothing wrong with that whatsoever. You can just keep Stewart on the bench and never play him, and obviously that extra money from having him instead of a Armstrong or João Pedro allows you to get more money into the 11. But instead of Odegaard and Stewart, for the same price, you could get Solanke up front, 7.5, 1 million less than Odegaard, and then you can get a 5.5 million midfielder. Now, I won't go into great detail about who that could be, but there's going to be quite a few options at that price point, and suddenly you've got a better bench option, and up front you've got a player nailed and on penalty. So I do think that's something to consider. I think, again, this is more of a general point, not about Solanke or any of the other players on this list. The way that most people are setting up drafts, they just don't have an 8.5 million midfielder or a slot for a 7.5, which is why they're not really being talked about that much. Plus, there's some issues over minutes and stuff for other players we're going to talk about. But I do think if you get to the stage of tinkering with your draft and you're suddenly putting in a Fernandes or an Odegaard or someone like that, maybe that combination in terms of overall squad depth could be slightly better. So I wouldn't rule him out. And like I said, in terms of the overall package, Solanke is pretty decent. Will he get into more squads than the 10.2% he's in right now at the time of recording? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything that's going to happen which suddenly skyrockets his... I don't know. What am I trying to say? That skyrockets his... I'm going to have to come back. Skyrockets his what? I wanted to say favoritism, but that's not right. Skyrockets his... I don't know. The love people have for him. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. Maybe I should edit that out. But basically, I don't expect his ownership to skyrocket. But he's a good option. Let's move on. So Ivan Toney up next. And this is a player that I included in my players to avoid video early on during pre-season. And I think I stand by that opinion. Like, what he potentially offers at Brentford is similar to Solanke in that he's nailed on, always plays 90 minutes pretty much anyway, and he's on penalties. The problem is, will he even be at Brentford? Right? I think most people would acknowledge that, even Brentford fans, by the way, he is going to leave the club either this season, if a big enough bid comes in that Brentford are happy with, or next season on a free. And I'm just not sure he's good enough to warrant the hassle of that going on and having him in your game week 1 squad. And look, I'm going to create a narrative here, right, which is easy to do and might not happen, but I think it's plausible, right? Let's say there's still negotiations going on close to game week 1, bearing in mind the transfer window won't be shut. It's perfectly reasonable for Brentford to leave him out of the squad. And even if he ends up staying, they might just leave him out until the transfer window closes and then have him after that. And if that happens, you might start missing the good fixtures which Brentford have to start, which are Palace at home game week 1 and Southampton at home game week 3. If you suddenly then get him back after missing games for City away and Spurs away, it just doesn't look so good. So I think in general, Toney can be a really good FPL option. We've seen that before. And if he does move, right, depending on where he goes, we might be talking about him again. And I'm not against buying him while he's at Brentford, but I just think he's not so good that I've got to stick him in for game week 1. I would rather just put someone else in at the same price point, and then maybe move on Ivan Toney later when we know exactly where he's going to be and what the fixtures are. So for me, he was an avoid early on during pre-season. That might change, but for now, it hasn't. Let's talk about Nicholas Jackson next, a player that I think probably had a little bit too much criticism from an FPL point of view last season, but also at the same time, I kind of understand it because he was frustrating to own. You can see that in the numbers. He ran at 0.58 non-penalty expected goals per 90, which, by the way, I think is very good, especially for your first season in the Premier League. But his actual goals per 90 was 0.45. So he did miss a few of the chances that he had. And as someone that owned him on multiple occasions last year, it was frustrating at times, right? So I completely get the point of view that people have with Jackson. Overall, though, I think a pretty good season. Like Nicholas Jackson to me at Chelsea is a little bit like Rasmus Højlund at Man United, that they came in to basically be the main number 9s, and that probably shouldn't have been what happened. There should have been a bit more depth in those positions. But ultimately, Jackson played a lot, 31 starts, 14 goals, 6 assists, 20 attack and return, 7.5 million. I think that's decent. So he is worth considering. We still probably need to see a little bit more of Maresca during pre-season in terms of who's going to play and where. Like if Nkunku's going to get a few minutes at number 9, that suddenly makes Jackson a little bit of a worse option because he can play off the left as well. He did that a couple of times last year, but Chelsea have other players that can do that. So I don't think we can be sure right now that his minutes are going to be as good. But also I think he did prove himself in that number 9 role. And if they don't buy a bunch of new players, which I wouldn't put it past them by the way, I think Jackson will get pretty good minutes and the fixtures are decent as well. So after that Man City game in game week 1, Wolves away, Palace at home, Bournemouth away, West Ham away and Brighton at home. And honestly, if you could guarantee the minutes for those first 6 game weeks in terms of getting 75, 80 plus, I think he's a really solid option. 4.1 points per match last year. If he can improve on the conversion to the chances he's getting, he'll be even better. He's only 3.6%, so somewhat of a differential as well. Personally, if I was spending 7.5, I'd almost think, is it worth the potential uncertainty over minutes when I can go and buy a penalty taker for the same price? And you've always got to think about that stuff. But ultimately, in his own right, or in isolation, I think he's a solid option. Is he as good as Nkunku? Could be. Probably not. But at least with Jackson, you kind of know what you're going to get. And the fact that he started 31 times means he's got the ability to stay fit as well. So I wouldn't completely rule him out. I don't expect him to suddenly be in lots of people's teams. But I think if he's going to start the season as the number 9, he could get returns early on. Jean-Philippe Mateta is another player like Ivan Toney that was on my players to avoid video earlier on during pre-season. And I feel like I kind of stand by that opinion too. He's not a terrible option. I understand why 12.1% of FPL managers have got him in their team. And if you showed me a draft with him in, I wouldn't strongly argue to take him out. I would probably suggest there's a better way to spend the money, but I don't think he's a awful option by any means. I'm just not convinced he's worth 7.5. To me, he feels like a 7 million forward at tops and probably 6.5. Like in terms of his goal threat, 0.36 expected goals per 90, that's less than the likes of Chris Wood and Muniz. At least I think it is anyway. Let me just double check here. If I just bring in Muniz over the whole season, yeah, he ran at 0.49 per 90, and then Chris Wood was 0.58. Now you can argue that Mateta's minutes might be better. He did really well under Glasner. Muniz and Chris Wood might be rotated a little bit more, and that's a fair argument. But also they're cheaper. They're only 6 million. Like, is Mateta worth 1.5 more? I know we got a lot of returns last year, but he did overperform. Like 0.36 XG per 90, 0.63 actual goals. Maybe he's just an amazing finisher, but I'd be a little bit sceptical about whether he can keep up those level of returns unless he starts getting more chances. In terms of the fixtures for Palace, I think they're pretty good. They're not amazing, but they're not terrible either. Brentford away, West Ham at home, Chelsea away, Leicester at home, first 4, then United at home and Everton away. There's a reason that I'm looking at Eze. He's a midfielder for 0.5 less and probably on penalties with better numbers, underlying data and stuff like that. I just can't get on board with Mateta at all. I mean, I didn't own him at all last season. He absolutely punished me towards the end. So maybe there's a little bit of subconscious that just wants me, that makes me want him to not do well. But I think realistically, I'm more open-minded than that. If Mateta had great numbers and was going to continue to be great under Glasner, I'd have him in. And I think he will get returns. But last year, it was, let me just double check 16 goals, 7 assists. Like three goals away from Ollie Watkins and Solanke. And 25 start, I don't know. I think it was a bit of a hot finishing streak. And I think those goal totals come down. He'll probably prove me wrong, and I'm not against owning him at some point. But hopefully when I do, he'll be less than 7.5. So Darwin Nunez, to me, from an FPL point of view, is basically Nicholas Jackson in terms of frustration levels, but with better underlying numbers. So his XG per 90 was 0.68 last year, which is really good. But still, when you look at the actual goals, it was 0.48. He does miss chances. We've all heard him being described as chaotic before. He causes defences problems. He gets on to the end of lots of chances. He just doesn't always put them away. And when you couple that with concerns over minutes, I'm just not sure I can go there again for the start of the season. Like, the fixtures for Liverpool are really good. Ipswich away, Brentford at home, United away game week 3, Forest at home game week 4, Bournemouth at home 5, and then Wolves away in game week 6. And again, and look, I've said this already in the video, and you can say it about a lot of players, you guarantee me 80 plus minutes from Nunez for the first 6 game weeks, I will go there again and take part in the frustration, but there's just no guarantee of that. Maybe there'll be more clues in pre-season when we hear more from Arne Slot, when we see what he sets up with. The problem is for Liverpool, a lot of their attackers are coming back from Copa America and Euros late. Obviously, Nunez was at Copa America, so was Luis Diaz, Gakpo from the Euros, etc. So in terms of how they're going to set up, we're not going to see a huge amount of games. And for me, it's just, I don't think I can go through that uncertainty again. If you've watched my videos in the past, you will have heard me say this before. Liverpool and Man City players are always great, right, when they play, because they're such attacking teams. Will Liverpool be as attacking or as good under Slot as they were Klopp? Maybe not. Maybe there's a little bit of a downgrade there in terms of performances. But I bet by the end of the season, they're still one of the highest goal scorers. And if that's the case, their FPL options are good. And they're good value as well. All their attackers, apart from Salah, are 7.5. But unless you can guarantee the minutes, you're just not going to get enough returns. And the problem with putting someone like Darwin in straight away is if he doesn't start, or he starts being benched or whatever, you've suddenly got a problem to deal with immediately. And personally, look, I'm not expecting us all to have 5 free transfers after the first 5 game weeks, right? Stuff will come up. But where possible, you probably want to avoid having to make too many early transfers. So, look, City and Liverpool, very similar for me. If there's injuries which force certain players to have to start, then I'm interested, right? And if we think that Slot's going to line up with Luis Diaz left wing, Darwin through the middle, and Salah on the right, and, you know, Jota and Gakpo are injured, then yeah, I'm interested in Darwin again. I'm ready to go there. But the circumstances have to be right, and I'm just not sure that's the case right now. And I think you can say similar for Gakpo. His underlying numbers, again, pretty good. 0.5 non-penalty expected goals per 90 last year. 0.44 actual goals. So he did underperform a little bit as well. Is he going to play, though? Is he going to be in that team regularly? I just don't think we can say that's going to be the case. Also, he was used last season under Klopp, you know, sometimes through the middle as like the number 9 or false 9. He even played some games a little bit deeper than that. But it looks like actually his best position is probably off the left. We saw that with Netherlands during the Euros. Is he going to play regularly there when Luis Diaz is there? I'm just not convinced by it. So I'm sure as we get closer to game week 1, I'm going to get a lot of questions about Liverpool attackers. My answer is going to be the same. You tell me who's going to start. Let's forget Salah for a second, because we can all agree he's going to play regularly. That's what you pay the extra money for. You can tell me who's going to start. They're a good option. Can I tell you who's going to get the most minutes right now? I just can't, unfortunately. We just don't have that information. So I'd rather just ignore them. But it wouldn't take much for me to go there. Like if Jota becomes the preferred number 9, he's fit, and the others have got back late and they're not going to start straight away, I'd be really keen on getting Jota in the team ahead of someone like Anthony Gordon for the same price. But we need more information. And Darwin Nunez, it really has to be the right info because every time I've owned him, it's just never gone well. And I really try to not have grudges against players. Like, if I think, I've used this word a lot now, but if the circumstances are right, I'll put anyone in, right? Even Luca Dean, who's known in the FPL community as a troll, if he goes to a different team, not Villa, or, all their left-backs are injured, I would consider him again, but it's not someone I would just put in lightly, right? I need to know it's the correct decision. So Gakpo and Darwin could absolutely do really well, but I think with current info, I'd probably ignore them. So out of the players we've looked at, my favourites are probably Havertz alongside Isak, not instead of. And then probably just because of the overall package and these underlying numbers from last year, probably Solanke. I think Toney could be good if he stays at Brentford, but probably too much hassle. Let's see what Hub says. So I've got the predicted points page up. It's always nice to see how well it tallies up with your personal opinion. I probably should set this up in advance, but I kind of like to do the reaction almost live. I know it's not a live stream, but I haven't already checked this out. So we'll go to first 6 game weeks and 7.5 million or above and click on forwards. Now I suspect that Haaland, Watkins, and Haaland, Isak, Watkins are the top 3, but obviously you pay a bit more money. Then it's Nicholas Jackson. I do think he's a really good option if the minutes are right. It'd be really interesting to see how Maresca sets up. Then it's Havertz again. You pay that extra 0.5 million. If the minutes are good, there's no reason why he can't get good points. Then Ivan Toney, I'd personally ignore him. The only way I would be confident going for him in game week 1 is if he or Brentford come out and says, I'm staying. I'm here for another season. Let's get started or something like that. But I just think he's good, but he's not put him in at all costs good. And then it's Solanke, then it's Mateta, and then it's Gakpo and Darwin. Again, it's just going to be the minutes that, like, Hub have got Darwin's minutes really low. And given that he's still not back from Copa America yet, that's probably fair. And maybe there is more chance that Gakpo starts. So if you look at the actual predicted points first 6 weeks, it's 28.7 for Mateta, only 29.7 for Solanke. Personally, I think there should be a bigger gap there. But what do I know? I just make videos on YouTube. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below which is your favourite player in this price bracket. And do any of you actually have a player from this price bracket in your team? Barely seen them mentioned at all. I guess Havertz a little bit, but not many of the 7.5s. If you're listening on podcast, rate 5 stars. And if you want to check out Fantasy Football Hub for yourself and all the great tools, not just that one, links in the description below. Otherwise, I will catch you tomorrow for another video.